Hey everyone, Jeff here with the J Free 906 podcast. And do you remember H8 Borehole, which then became Caisson H8? I do. And I was starting to think about it a lot more here in the recent days when they've been talking about some of the voids and things that they're finding down in the L14, L15 areas. And so I thought I'd take a look back and try to gather up some of the information and kind of look at see how H8 may have been important then and even more important now. Now, going back to 2017, this was season 5, episode 4, 5, and 6. Now, I remember a little bit about H8 when they were originally talking about it. And I remember very clearly that Marty was calling it, it's the money pit. And again, I think we found the money pit. He was pretty adamant about that. They are not calling that the money pit anymore, but you know what? It might be. It really might be, or might be linked to the original money pit. And here's why I say that. This is a plan that they put together for these 40 holes that they were going to put in the ground. And you can see here that they are all around the chapel and the head shafts. Both of them are contained inside this area of these all of these boreholes that they did on this program. Now, here they are. They're around C1, T1, Valley 3, and Gal 1. These are where they're putting those boreholes. This was the best area of interest at the time when they were going through these, when they were going through these drill programs, trying to figure out where the money pit was. Because remember, it was lost over the years by folks that had gone in and pretty much destroyed the money pit area over the years. So, in these 40 boreholes, after they got done drilling the borehole, they were going to then pull the casing back out and put in these PVC pipes. This would retain the borehole and then they could use it later. They could put some cameras down there or whatever they needed to later on to take a better look at down inside the ground in those spots. So that was the idea, and that's is exactly what they did. Now, they had Brewster Drilling. It was a company that they had brought out. This was prior to Choice Drilling came coming out later on, but Brewster Drilling was the company that they were using. Also, what they had done was they were taking the spoils that were coming up out of the casing, and they were running them over and dumping them into a shaker. And then here's a picture of the shaker as it was going along, and they were going through and sifting everything as it was coming up. Okay, well, here they were using it a little bit differently, and they were pouring it out onto the shaker table that had a screen. The water would run through, and then, of course, all the heavy solids would be on top that they could go through and look at a little closer. What I thought was funny was these colanders. How things have changed over the years for these guys, right? Back in, they were using these regular old kitchen colanders to gather their the spoils in and then taking them over and going through them a little bit closer. Here you see Craig is going through and he's dipping it in the water and he's shaking it around and he's digging in there for samples. How things have changed. Okay, here we have a look at the machine working, and then you can see the hose going over there through this little induction system and then dumping it into the spoils table so they could do their work. Here's another look at this, and this is over where the chapel and the head and shafts were. And something I wanted to point out about the chapel shaft, a couple different things. One, this is an aerial photograph of the actual uh, the chapel shack or the drill site that they had set up. Which I kind of thought this was neat to look into the archives of the actual area that they had set up for the chapel shaft. Quite a construction there. Now, if you remember, when they put their drill down into it at about 153 feet, they hit what they thought was concrete and then into wood, dropped about 7 feet. This is where they thought that they were inside of what they now call the chapel vault. This is when they took that bit back up. And in a sworn statement, this was recorded that they had found bits of gold on the drill head itself, and also that piece of parchment paper that had the VI written on it, if you remember that. Okay, they continued on and they went on through drilling on down through this voided area. And then they came at about 171 feet and they hit a solid object that they said was metal based upon the sound that they were getting. They could hear it. It sounded like it was on metal, they said. Okay. Now, one thing I wanted to point out here, real quick, was that Craig had said during these episodes, he had said something that because of the decades worth of drilling, tunneling, and flooding in the money pit over the years, it had dropped. The whole area had dropped about 10 feet in elevation. okay, sank like in a sinkhole, had actually sunk about 10 feet. Now, when we look at that today, I was always a little confused about adding that 10 feet. I was always thinking, well, they've built up the land on there to today's level because they go out there with the crane is on top of it. They had to build it up when they brought the caissons out with Rock Equipment Company. They had to build it back up. And so I thought, well, they're now above. You're going to add 10 to that. Well, that may not have been the case. If you go by what Craig was saying about how everything had actually sunk about 10 feet, okay, keep that in mind as we go forward because hitting that metal at about 171 feet was the key. Now, here's a picture of the chapel and the head shafts drawn out on paper. And so, one thing I wanted to point out about this, if you notice in the upper right hand corner, they had estimated, and this is something that the team didn't take into consideration at the time, that the chapel shaft or had actually when it was put in, it deviated just like those drills do. When they put those drills in, the 6-inch boreholes in today, and it goes down and it actually will walk, as they call it. By the time they get to the bottom, it may have walked 7 to 10 feet away from the actual point above where it started. That's why they put that gyro down in there every so often so they can check the how much it has walked and keep its location all the way down. That way they know where it is. They didn't realize at the time that the chapel shaft had been put down was actually about 10 to 12 feet north of where it started. So by the time that chapel had gotten down to the level that they wanted to, they missed their target by about 10 feet. Okay, here's a little picture of that. And so they actually missed it. So when the guys were doing their drilling, they thought, okay, let's take that into consideration. So H8 became the next important hole that they put in, and that's it right here. Okay, now here's that important part. Think again about that portion where they hit the middle at about 171 feet, Chappell's day. In the early 1900s, late 1800s, they hit that metal at about 171 feet. The guys, when they put in H8, when they were drilling down at about 162 feet, they hit a very hard surface and they thought they were going to have to stop. And lo and behold, they bought up pieces of metal. First, they find metal, and then they start to go through. As they were going down through there, they came through different areas where they hit creosote wood soaked in creosote. Creosote was like an oily substance that they would spread on the wood that would help preserve it. And when it was soaked in water for a long period of time, they were going through it. Now, this would have been from the chapel shaft. Now, one thing to point out too is that one of the other boreholes that they put down in this head and shaft, or I'm sorry, in this chapel shaft area, they actually went down and they found 2 voids. One void they found that they called the minor void was only about 3 feet. It was about 166 foot down to 169 foot. Then they kept on going and they got another one that they hit at about 179 to 215 feet. It was a 30-foot void, 30-foot tall. Now I'm thinking that they're not gonna have any kind of a actual chamber or cave or anything down there that's that big. So I'm thinking that had to be inside the chapel shaft. That's my only conclusion to that, is that had to be inside that shaft, which again would have told them that they definitely were on target for that shaft. Okay, now getting back to that metal. They found those pieces of metal at about 162 feet. Then they found this right here that Terry hands over to Rick, and they look at it, and it turns out to be the bone. Now, they found bone, 2 pieces of bone down. Actually, found more than 2 pieces, but initially they found the one piece that was actually in the samples that were coming up from the shaker as they were drilling H8. And then the other one was found, the one on the top was actually found by Dan Hensky and Jack Begley when they were going through the spoils over on that table when they were washing it down with water and they were going through very meticulously. They found this other piece, the one that's on top. Both of them were found to be human bone, and both of them were from 2 different people. One was a Middle Eastern person, and that one dated 1682 to 1736. The one on the bottom was from European descent, and was 1678 to 1764. So both of them were from the same time period. That is very significant. Think about it, folks. 160 to 165 feet underground, you found not only a void down there, but you also find pieces of bone. Nobody's buried that deep. And with the dates of these ranging well before the money pit was ever discovered, these bones have to be from depositors. Now, along with these bones that were found, they also came across other pottery. Now, down about 190 to 192 feet, they came up with these pieces of pottery here. Now, these were said to were looked at by Laird Niven, and they were found to be, he called it pearlware. Now, when he dated these, he gave them a date of about 1780, which only is a few years before the discovery of the money pit. The weird thing is, why would they be down at 190 to 192 feet? Why would there be this pottery down there that deep? They also found bits of leather and bits of parchment paper. These are the bits of leather. Now, remember, Chappell had found that piece of parchment paper that had the letters VI on it. Now these guys have found more pieces of leather that was deemed to be bookbinding and also parchment paper. Again, why would these be down there so deep? This is another piece of bone that was found down there. This one wasn't really talked about too much on the show. They found it down there in H8. This one was never determined whether it was human. At least we don't know on the show if it was human or not. Now, another thing that they decided to do after they had removed the drill casing and put in the PVC piping, they did a program called Dual Induction Log. Now, they were putting this sensor down into the pipe and it was picking up metal anomalies down there, like kind of like the magnetometer does. Now, as they put this unit down in the ground, they came up with some very interesting results. So, at about 48 meters or 157 feet, they got a wave in this showing some sort of anomaly right around that 160-foot level. Now, here is a look at all the different pipes that they had put this dual induction log down inside. So, if you notice here, about 160 feet, there are several anomalies in each of these pipes, or several of the pipes right around in that area. And this data turned out to be very important because it was marking the metal anomalies that were inside that void. There's still something down there that is affecting the magnetometer in a big way. You can see it closer here. And this line right here is the 160-foot line. And you can see they're just above it. And he said about 157 feet is where he got these anomalies in H8. But look at them. They're all right there in that area. There's something down there still to this day. Now, they continued on talking about the data after they had processed it in this dual induction log. And here's some more of this. Now, in this picture here, you can clearly see there's C1 right there, and here's H8. Both of those are on the edge of a very large opening or void in the ground. Now, we know that C1, they've had a camera down there, and we've seen the pictures of that. That is definitely an open area, and there was what looked like some, like, wrought iron down there leaning up against the wall and some scattered pieces laying on the ground through those pictures. We haven't had a camera down in H8, to see anything in there. Why that is, I don't really know. At least they haven't shown us. But they did put sonar down in there, and they did come up with a sonar hit that had a very right angle. This was just before that sonar filled with water and then the whole unit went down. But in H8, they did go down and underneath the casing, they found a square corner on one side, which I'm assuming is right down here in the bottom where H8 is. This was a very significant right angle in the wall corner. Okay. Nature doesn't generally make right angle corners very well, so that's why they're thinking it was manipulated by man. But now let's take this a step further. Here's a look at a cross section looking across at these two anomalies, and you can see here's H8, this little line right here. If you can see that is the H8 pipe, here's the C1 pipe, and they're looking at this anomaly. This is the C1 H8 anomaly right down here. That's where they think the Chappell Vault was, right down there. Now, here's a closer look at that. Okay, so you've got the C1H8 anomaly right here. Okay, that's down in that void area that they're looking at. Is this where the Chapel vault was. Now, here's a couple more pictures that I wanted to show you. As they were giving this information out to the team, take a look at this. Now, you can see over here, here's a C1 and H8, but you see all these other voids that he's making a comment about at this time. Here's another one. Now, this is a better look at it right here. C1 right here in the middle of the picture, and then H8. Okay. You see all of this over here to the side. Now, this is where I'm going to say that this is significant to what's happening today. Now, I did the best I could to try to take this picture and overlay it onto a picture that Prometheus puts together and kind of get an idea of where these match up. Now, I took the two, you got the two locations, C1 and H8, and that's how I could line this up as best I could into this picture here. Now, I know this isn't the easiest to look at because I was trying to get the transparency of the um, data over top of the ground here. But take a look at this. And I think this is what I found very interesting. Okay, so here you have this is C1 right here. And down here you have H8. And here you have tunnels. These are tunnels that are winding their way around. Now, why is this interesting? Well, for one, right here, down in this spot here where you see this one tunnel, that is our L16 that they are now looking into as the show takes place right now in December of 2023. The new show coming out in January 2nd of 2024. We're going to get another look down here in probably L16, L15. It's going to be one of those boreholes, but it's going to be right here in this area. Now look where it goes. It goes over heading towards the garden shaft. And then right here underneath the baby blob and the blob, you've got this line right here. Now we know that they were just chasing a tunnel that goes from the baby blob over and underneath the garden shaft. And then they also found it continuing on the other side, on the hill, on the other side of the garden shaft, way over here. Okay. That I believe is that tunnel that they've been chasing. So this showed up in their seismic study way back in 2017 in episode number 5. Now it continues on, it goes right over to the baby blob and all of that, and then it also continues down to C1 and to where H8 is. Now you got some other stuff over here way off to the side, which I think might be where that large anomaly that we saw, that high density anomaly that we found, it might be over there. Now that was from the muon technology that would come up with that. Muon has found a lot of this stuff. Seismic has found a lot of these things. Folks, I'm telling you, there's something down here. And now we find these all these tunnels may be interconnected. Now, remember back when they keep talking about the fact that the Money Pit tunnel had collapsed, all the wood and everything that was making up the Money Pit, the original Money Pit tunnel had collapsed and then took the treasure and everything got washed down. It could be all over down here in the bottom of this. Now, time has gone by with all this water down there, and there is a little bit of a current down there at times. They've noticed it with the silt moving around, but there's covered with silt and debris. That the tunnels themselves are probably collapsing. All this dirt and everything it could very well be on top of the treasure. Keep in mind, too, Dr. Ian Spooner and Dr. Michaels have both talked about the fact that they still have a lot of content of gold and silver in the water samples. Okay. That tells them, and Dr. Ian Spooner has told me, he believes that means it's still there or it would not have those high concentrations in the water samples. So is it down there? Is it all covered up by the silt and rocks and dirt and everything else? It could very well be. If they can only get boots under the ground down there to get a look and go find this for themselves, maybe get Gary down there, do a little metal detecting. Okay, the last thing I wanted to point out was this right here. Rock Equipment Company, when they came out to put the large caisson, the 60-inch caisson down into, which was H8 at that time, they put this caisson down. This is where Vanessa Lucido had said that they had hit about a 10-foot void. And look where she said it starts at 162 feet. And we've seen that that depth over and over and over again, all related to H8. Could Marty have been right? Could this have been the original money pit and they found it? But anyway, I thought you might all enjoy this little look back at the H8 and how I think it was significant then, even more significant now. Catch you next time right here on the J Free 906 podcast.